That was me. The one you might have seen in the viral clips. The one with the smug smile that stretched from ear to ear, broadcasting to thousands of my followers. I was the one who held up a cheap plastic rosary to the camera in my brightly lit studio, my voice dripping with self-righteous certainty, as I declared, "This is the idolatry that pulls you away from the one true God. This is the chain that binds you to tradition instead of truth." And then, with a flair for the dramatic that my audience had come to love, I threw it onto the polished concrete floor. I didn't just drop it. I threw it down. And with my designer stiletto heel, a sharp blood-red stiletto I'd bought to celebrate, hitting a new subscriber milestone, I stomped on it. I ground it into the floor with a cold, calculated fury until the little plastic beads shattered and scattered like shrapnel. The sound of that cracking plastic, that sharp, snapping report echoing in my studio. To me, it was the sound of spiritual victory. It was my declaration of war against what I had built my entire ministry on exposing, the great Catholic deception. My name is Joy, and I am 58 years old. For the last 15 years, my husband, Pastor David, and I have run an online ministry. We weren't just preachers. We were firebrands. We were digital warriors for Christ, and our battlefield was the internet. Our mission, as we saw it, was to preach an unfiltered, uncompromising gospel. And in our view, nothing was more compromised, more diluted, than the Catholic Church. To me, it was a fortress of lies built on a foundation of superstition. Every statue was a golden calf. Every prayer to a saint was a betrayal of the first commandment and the Virgin Mary. Well, to me, she was the greatest idol of them all. The Queen of Heaven, they called her. I called her the Queen of Heresy. My blood would boil just hearing her name. I saw her as a distraction, a goddess smuggled into Christianity to make it more palatable for pagans. And I made it my personal crusade to tear that idol down in the hearts of as many people as I could reach. I wasn't always this way. I grew up in a quiet, respectable Baptist church in the Midwest. We sang hymns from a hymnal. The pastor wore a simple suit, and the sermons were about being a good neighbor. It was safe. It was comfortable. And as I got older, I found it to be utterly powerless. It felt weak, apologetic. When I met David in Bible college, we both felt that same hunger for something more. Something with teeth. We believed the modern church had grown soft, and we were going to be the ones to bring back the hard truths. So we started our ministry, first out of our living room, then a small rented office, and finally, from the professional studio we built in our basement. Our brand was boldness. Our brand was confrontation, and our favorite target, the one that always got the most engagement, the most clicks, the most amends in the live chat, was the Catholic Church. I remember the arguments I'd have. I had a cousin who converted to marry a Catholic man, and at every family gathering, I'd corner her. I wouldn't even say hello first. I'd just launch in. "Are you still bowing down to those plaster dolls, Carol? Do you really think a dead woman can hear your prayers?" I'd see the hurt in her eyes, the way she'd shrink back. But I interpreted her pain as conviction. I thought the Holy Spirit was using me to make her uncomfortable in her sin. I was proud of it. I remember once, on vacation in a small town, we walked past an old, beautiful Catholic church. St. Sebastian's, I think it was. There was a little grotto outside with a statue of Mary. It was old, the paint was peeling, and someone had left a bouquet of wilting flowers at her feet. David tried to pull me along, but I was incensed. I saw it as a public display of paganism. I walked right up to it, and while a few people watched from across the street, I sneered. "This is who you pray to? A piece of painted plaster?" I wanted to push it over. The only thing that stopped me was David grabbing my arm and physically pulling me away, whispering, "Joy, not here, not like this." He wasn't disagreeing with the sentiment, just the strategy. That's why the rosary video felt so right. It was the perfect strategy. It was a controlled environment, my studio, my platform, my rules. I had bought the rosary online specifically for this purpose. As I held it up, I could see the live chat feed scrolling on the monitor next to the camera. "Amen, Pastor Joy. Preach the truth. Smash the idol." They were cheering me on. They were validating everything I believed. When my heel came down, I felt a surge of power. It was a performance, yes, but it was also a deeply felt act of worship for me. I was destroying a symbol of what I thought was evil to glorify what I knew was good. My daughter, my sweet 16-year-old Sophia, was in the control room, running the stream for me. She was so good with technology. I glanced at her through the glass, and she gave me a little thumbs up, her eyes glued to the engagement numbers on the screen. The video exploded. It was my most viewed, most shared, most commented on video ever. I was a hero to my followers and a devil to my detractors. I had drawn a line in the sand, and I had never felt more certain, more righteous, or more completely in the will of God in my entire life. I was Joy, the giant slayer, the truth teller, and I had absolutely no idea that I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to be pushed into the abyss. Before I go any further into what happened next, because my whole world, everything I just described, was about to be torn apart in the most terrifying way imaginable, I just want to take a moment. If this story is already speaking to you in some way, if you feel a stirring in your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel and clicking the notification bell so you don't miss the rest of this testimony. It's important to me that this story reaches who it's meant to reach, and I'd love to know who I'm talking to feel that connection with you. In the comments below, just drop a quick hello and let me know where in the world you're watching from. It would mean so much to see that. The days that followed were a blur of digital victory. The video didn't just go viral, it was a wildfire. The engagement numbers were staggering, far beyond anything we'd ever seen. My phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, comments, shares, new subscribers. David was ecstatic. He saw it as a sign of a great revival, a confirmation that our ministry was at the tip of the spear of God's work in this generation. We were on the front lines, and we were winning. We decided to celebrate, not with anything extravagant, just a special dinner at home. I made David's favorite, a pot roast that simmered all day, filling the house with a warm, savory scent. Sophia was at the table with us, her laptop open as she tracked the live analytics. "Mom, you're trending in 3 countries," she said, her eyes wide with a teenager's awe for digital fame. People are debating it everywhere. I felt a surge of pride that was almost intoxicating. This was it. This was the fruit of our labor. David raised his glass of sparkling cider. "To my wife," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "God's fearless warrior." "You're shaking the gates of hell, Joy." I smiled, a genuine soul-deep smile of satisfaction. I looked at my daughter, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen, and my heart swelled. She was part of this. She was helping us fight the good fight. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as it should be. And then, in the span of a single heartbeat, the world ended. Sophia looked up from her laptop, a strange, confused expression on her face. "Mom," she said, her voice small, a little slurred. "I feel funny." Before I could even ask what she meant, her eyes rolled back in her head. There was a soft gasp, a sigh of air leaving her lungs, and she slumped sideways in her chair, sliding to the floor with a sickeningly soft thud. The next few minutes are a chaotic screaming montage in my memory. The clatter of David's chair as he knocked it over. My own voice, a shrill, unrecognizable shriek of her name. "Sophia! Sophia!" The frantic fumbling with my phone to dial 911, my fingers feeling like fat, useless sausages. The dispatcher's calm voice on the other end felt like an insult to the sheer terror that was ripping through my body. David was on the floor, trying to perform CPR, his face a mask of desperate concentration, counting compressions in a choked whisper. I remember the paramedics arriving, their faces grim, their movements efficient and terrifyingly urgent. They swept into our home, our sanctuary of victory, and turned it into a scene of utter catastrophe. They worked on her right there, on our dining room floor, next to the half-eaten pot roast and the celebratory cider. And then they were lifting her onto a gurney, a tangle of wires and tubes already attached to her still, pale body. The hospital was a blur of antiseptic smells, fluorescent lights that hummed with an indifferent drone, and the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum. We were ushered into a small, sterile waiting room, the kind with uncomfortable chairs and old magazines no one ever reads. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only an hour before a doctor with tired eyes and a kind but firm expression came to speak with us. The words he used were clinical, precise. "Massive cardiac arrest. Anomalous arrhythmia. We're doing everything we can, but you need to prepare yourselves. Her heart is not responding to treatment." I couldn't process it. My daughter. My healthy, vibrant 16-year-old Sophia. It was impossible. It had to be a mistake. This was a spiritual attack. The devil was furious about the rosary video and was lashing out. That had to be it. So, I did what I had always done. I began to fight. I stood in that hallway outside the ICU and I prayed the way I preached. I rebuked the spirit of death. I claimed healing in the name of Jesus. I quoted scripture with a loud, forceful voice. People stared. Nurses hurried past, averting their eyes. David tried to quiet me, but I shook him off. This was a battle, and I was a warrior. But as the hours dragged on, my confident declarations began to feel hollow. My words, which had always felt so powerful in my studio, seemed to just hit the polished hospital floor and die. There was no answer, no sense of presence, no rush of peace. There was only the cold, terrifying silence of God. For the first time in my life, I was screaming into a void. My faith, the bedrock of my entire existence, the very thing I had built my identity and my ministry on, was offering me nothing. No comfort, no hope. Just the rhythmic, monotonous beep of a machine that was keeping my daughter's body alive while her spirit was slipping away. The giant slayer, the truth-teller, was now just a terrified mother, utterly and completely alone, watching her whole world flatline. That sound, it was the sound of the end. And I need you to hear what happened next, to understand how that wasn't the end. So if this story is touching you, please take a second to give this video a like and click that notification bell, so you'll be here for the moment everything changed. The beeping stopped. There's a particular sound a heart monitor makes when it's working. It's a rhythmic, almost comforting sound, even in its urgency. But there is another sound it makes when it's over. A long, final, unbroken drone. A single piercing note that signifies the end of all notes. It filled the room, the hallway, my entire universe. The line on the screen, which had been a frantic, chaotic dance of life, was now perfectly, horribly straight. And then, a doctor, with a quiet gesture of finality, silenced the machine. And the silence that followed was 1,000 times louder than the drone. It was the sound of absolute, irreversible loss. David crumpled. He fell into one of those plastic chairs and put his head in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with sobs he couldn't contain. But I just stood there, frozen, staring at my daughter's face, so pale against the white pillow. My warrior prayers had failed. My rebukes had been useless. My faith, my loud, certain, aggressive faith, had shattered against a wall of reality, and there was nothing left. I had screamed into the void, and the void had simply stared back, unimpressed. It was in that moment of utter desolation that she appeared. She wasn't an angel with wings or a figure of blinding light. She was a nurse, an older woman. Her name tag read, Agnes. She had deep, kind lines etched around her eyes, the kind that come from a lifetime of smiling and a lifetime of witnessing grief. She hadn't been one of the frantic team working on Sophia. She seemed to just materialize in the doorway, her presence calm and steady in the swirling chaos of our sorrow. She looked at David, then she looked at me, and her eyes held not pity, but a profound, knowing compassion. She walked slowly, quietly, to Sophia's bedside. She didn't say a word to me. She didn't ask permission. She simply reached into the pocket of her scrubs and pulled something out. My breath caught in my throat. It was a rosary. Not like the cheap plastic one I had destroyed. This one was made of dark, simple wood, the beads worn smooth with use, the cross a plain, unadorned silver. My first instinct was a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. The last embers of the old joy flared to life. How dare she? How dare she bring that talisman of idolatry into this room, to my daughter's deathbed? I opened my mouth to scream at her, to tell her to get that demonic object away from my child. But no sound came out. My body was locked in place, my voice stolen. I was a spectator in my own tragedy, forced to watch as this quiet, unassuming woman did the one thing I had built my ministry on, condemning. Agnes gently, tenderly, laid the wooden rosary on Sophia's chest, right over her still heart, and then she bowed her head, closed her eyes, and began to whisper. The words were so soft I could barely hear them, but I knew what they were. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. And as those hated, forbidden words filled the silence of the room, something happened. Not to Sophia, not yet. Something happened to me. The air grew thick, warm. The sterile, antiseptic smell of the hospital was suddenly, inexplicably, replaced by a scent. It was faint at first, then stronger. It was the smell of roses, a garden full of them, blooming in the dead of winter. And with the scent came a presence. It wasn't the thundering, commanding presence of God the Father that I had always sought. It wasn't the brotherly presence of Jesus I had preached. This was something else. It was gentle. It was feminine. It was a feeling of being held, of being enfolded in an embrace so full of mercy that it was physically painful. It was a love that didn't care about my righteousness, my ministry, my viral videos, or my certainty. It saw right through all of it, down to the terrified, broken mother underneath. And in that moment, I saw myself as I truly was. I saw the pride, the arrogance, the cruelty I had mistaken for conviction. I saw my heel coming down on that plastic rosary, and a wave of shame so powerful it buckled my knees, washed over me. I wasn't a warrior. I was a vandal, a bully who had desecrated a symbol of a love I couldn't even begin to comprehend. And right then, as Agnes whispered, "Pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death," a sound cut through the room, a single, sharp, impossible sound. Beep! My head snapped up. Every person in that room, the doctors who had been quietly filling out paperwork, the other nurses, David. We all stared at the monitor. The flat line jumped. It was a tiny, weak little spike, but it was there. Then, after a heart-stopping pause, beep, another one, a rhythm, faint. Ready. But it was a rhythm, a heartbeat. The doctors rushed back to the bed, their faces a mixture of disbelief and astonishment. They were shouting things I didn't understand, checking vitals, moving with a renewed, frantic energy. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at the simple wooden rosary rising and falling, ever so slightly, on my daughter's chest. The very thing I had declared a chain of bondage had just become her lifeline. It's hard to even speak about this part of the story without my voice breaking. The memory is so raw, so powerful. If you're still with me, if you can feel even a fraction of what I felt in that room, it would mean the world if you could just give this video a like and click that notification bell, because you need to hear what came next, what it was like to face myself in the light of that impossible miracle. Sophia was moved to a recovery room a few hours later. The doctors were baffled. They used phrases like spontaneous cardiogenic recovery and a 1 in a million statistical anomaly. They spoke of the resilience of the young human heart. They spoke of everything and anything except what had actually happened. My mind, my old logical preacher's mind, went to work immediately, trying to build a fortress against the impossible. It had to be a coincidence, a perfectly timed adrenal surge. The last dose of medication finally kicking in at the exact moment the nurse was praying. That had to be it. And the smell of roses, a classic sign of a stress-induced olfactory hallucination. I had read about it in a psychology journal. My brain was simply protecting itself, creating a sensory experience to cope with the trauma. I clung to these explanations like a drowning woman clings to a piece of driftwood. For a few days, it almost worked. Sophia was stable, slowly improving, and I could almost convince myself that our prayers, my loud, demanding warrior prayers, had just been on a delay. But then there was the smell. It wouldn't leave me alone. It would come out of nowhere, with no trigger. I'd be in the sterile hospital cafeteria, stirring a cup of burnt coffee, and suddenly, the air would be thick with the scent of a blooming rose garden. I'd be in the car driving home for a few hours of restless sleep, and I'd have to pull over because the fragrance was so overwhelmingly real, so present, it felt like someone had filled the car with bouquets. It wasn't a memory. It was an experience, happening over and over again. And every time I smelled it, I didn't feel peace. I felt sick with shame. The scent was a direct link back to that moment in the ICU, to Agnes's quiet prayer. and to the rosary on my daughter's chest. And with the smell came the memories, playing on a loop in my mind's eye. I'd see my own face on the video, smug and certain. I'd hear the crack of the plastic beads under my stiletto heel. I'd see my cousin Carol's face at the family barbecue, the way her eyes welled up when I called her an idolater. I saw myself sneering at the peeling statue in that little grotto. Each memory was a fresh stab of guilt. My pride, which had once felt like a suit of armor, now felt like a cage of my own making, and its bars were glowing red hot. It was a war inside my own soul, a battle between a lifetime of certainty and one impossible moment. And if you've ever felt that kind of war inside yourself, if this is resonating with you, please, just take a moment to click the like button and the little bell, so you can walk with me through the rest of this. One afternoon, I saw Agnes in the hallway during her break. She was sitting on a bench, her head bowed, that same simple wooden rosary moving through her fingers. She wasn't making a show of it. It was as natural to her as breathing. She looked up and saw me staring, and a gentle smile touched her lips. There was no judgment in her eyes. No, "I told you so." She just said, "Heard your girl is going to make a full recovery. That's a true blessing." I just nodded, unable to speak. "If you ever need a quiet place," she added, gesturing vaguely towards the street, "St. Sebastian's is just 2 blocks down. The doors are always open." She then got up and went back to her duties, leaving me alone with her simple, devastating invitation. For 2 days, I fought it. Going into a Catholic church, me, Joy, the great exposer of Romanism. It was unthinkable. It was a betrayal of everything I stood for. But I couldn't sleep. The smell of roses haunted my waking hours, and the image of my heel shattering those beads haunted my dreams. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I told David I was going for a walk to get some air. I walked the 2 blocks, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something I couldn't name. There it was, St. Sebastian's, an old brick building, unassuming, with a large wooden door. It looked exactly like the kind of place I would have once pointed to as a den of superstition. My hand trembled as I reached for the heavy iron handle. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled of old wood, beeswax, and the faint, sweet scent of incense. It wasn't empty. It was full of a quiet I had never known. My ministry was loud. My worship was loud. This silence was ancient, profound. My eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through stained glass windows, painting the stone floor in jewels of blue and red. And there, in a small alcove to the side, was a statue of her, Mary. She was holding the child Jesus, her head tilted slightly, a look of serene sorrow on her carved face. Someone had left a single white rose at her feet. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. This was the idol, the plaster doll, the queen of heresy, and all I felt was a crushing wave of my own filthiness. I saw all my mockery, all my arrogance, all my hatred for this woman, this mother, laid bare before her silent plaster gaze. Slowly, as if my legs were made of lead, I walked to the front pew and sank onto the hard wooden kneeler. I didn't know the words. I didn't know the Hail Mary or any other Catholic prayer. I just knelt there in the house of my sworn enemy, and for the first time in my life I didn't preach to God. I just wept, and in a voice that was no more than a broken whisper, I said the only words that I had left. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. Please, forgive me." Kneeling on that cold, hard floor, I felt something break inside of me. Not like the shattering of plastic beads, but like a dam of pride that had held back a lifetime of tears. I wept until my body ached, until the front of my shirt was soaked, until there were no more tears to cry. And in the emptiness that followed, a quiet settled over my soul. The war was over. I had surrendered. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt free. The scent of roses in that moment was no longer a haunting accusation. It was a gentle perfume of welcome, a sign of a mercy I had done nothing to deserve. I left St. Sebastian's that day, a different woman than the one who had walked in. The armor was gone. All that was left was me. Of course, the world doesn't stop for one person's spiritual crisis. The news of Sophia's recovery spread, but so did the story of what happened in that ICU room. Agnes, in her quiet way, had told a few of her prayer group friends, and from there, the story took on a life of its own. When I tried to explain it to David, he just stared at me, his face a canvas of confusion and hurt. "Joy, you were under incredible stress," he said, his voice pleading. "Your mind was playing tricks on you. It was a coincidence. God healed Sophia because we prayed." He couldn't accept it. He wouldn't. To him, accepting this miracle meant accepting that our entire ministry, our entire belief system, was built on a foundation of error. It was too much to ask. The backlash from our online community was swift and brutal. When word got out that I was seen visiting a Catholic church, my inbox exploded. "Pastor Joy has been deceived by a seducing spirit," one email screamed. "The devil is a great counterfeiter of miracles," another declared. My own followers, people who had once cheered me on, now accused me of betraying the faith, of falling for a Roman trick. They sent me articles and videos exposing Marian apparitions and the pagan roots of the rosary. They were trying to save me, using the very same weapons I had taught them to wield. And the cruelest irony was that the old Joy would have agreed with every word they said. But I couldn't argue. I had no desire to. When confronted, whether by David or a concerned follower, my only response was a quiet, unshakable statement. It was the most real experience of my life. There was nothing else to say. I couldn't prove it. I couldn't explain it. I could only bear witness to it. I started going back to St. Sebastian's, at first just to sit in the silence. Then I attended a daily mass, sitting in the very back pew, feeling like a spy. I watched people my age, young people, families, moving with a quiet reverence that was foreign to me. I saw them kneel, make the sign of the cross, and receive the Eucharist. These were the rituals I had mocked, the empty traditions I had condemned. But now, I saw them with new eyes. I saw not idolatry, but intimacy. Not superstition, but a deep, abiding faith. Agnes introduced me to her prayer group, a circle of older women who met on Tuesday mornings. They didn't grill me or try to convert me. They just welcomed me. They brought me coffee and listened to my story without a hint of judgment. They talked about Mary, not as a goddess, but as a mother, their mother. A mother who loved them and led them closer to her son. For the first time, I felt like I was part of a family, not just the leader of an army. The breaking point, the moment of no return, came about a month later. Sophia was home, still weak but getting stronger every day. I knew what I had to do. I went down to the basement, to my studio. The bright lights, the high-tech camera, the polished floor where I had committed my act of desecration. It all felt like a scene from someone else's life. I sat in my usual chair, but I didn't turn on the triumphant background music or put up our ministry's logo. I just hit the Go Live button. Thousands of people tuned in, expecting a sermon, expecting me to refute the rumors about my fall from grace. They saw my face, raw and without makeup. They saw the tears already welling in my eyes. And then they saw what I was holding in my hands. It was the simple wooden rosary Agnes had given me. For 15 years, I began, my voice trembling. I have used this platform to preach what I believed was the truth. And in the process, I have slandered, I have mocked, and I have hated things I did not understand. I told them everything. I told them about my pride, about the video, about Sophia's heart stopping. I described the drone of the flatline monitor and the scent of roses that filled the room. I told them about Agnes and how her quiet prayer to the woman I called a heretic brought my daughter back from the dead. I stood in judgment over a mother's love, I said, the tears now streaming down my face. And when my own heart was breaking as a mother, it was her intercession, her mercy, that saved me. The very thing I destroyed was the very thing that lifted my daughter from her deathbed and me from the pit of my own pride. I got off my chair, and right there, on the floor, where I had stomped on those plastic beads, I knelt. "I am so sorry," I whispered into the microphone. "I ask forgiveness from God, and I ask forgiveness from His mother, and from every one of you whose faith I have wounded with my arrogance." I ended the stream, and a new kind of silence filled the studio. Not the silence of God's absence, but the silence of a soul finally at peace. It wasn't about changing a religion. It was about my heart being completely and utterly changed. It was about realizing that the mercy I had been so stingy with had been poured out on me in abundance. If my story, this testimony of my own brokenness and redemption, has moved you in any way, if it has sparked even a small flame of hope in your own heart, I would be so grateful if you would give this video a like and click that little bell to subscribe. My journey is just beginning, and I want to share it with you. But more than that, I want to create a community of grace right here, in this digital space. So please, in the comments below, I'm not asking for arguments or debates. I just want to hear from you. Have you ever felt a love that you didn't deserve? Have you ever been shown mercy when you expected judgment? Share a piece of your story so we can bear witness together to the incredible, relentless love of God that finds us, even when we are at our worst.